Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this CSIRO Conversations event on responsible AI, building a stronger ecosystem for business success. It's a real pleasure to welcome everybody today. I think we had almost 1,000 registrations for this event, so a lot of interest in this particular topic, where we're going to try and help business in particular understand how they can apply and adopt AI responsibly. So I'll be your host for the next hour or so. I'm John Whittle. I'm the director of Data 61, which is the digital R&D arm at the CSIRO. And I'm also the host of the Everyday AI podcast. And if you want a kind of gentle introduction to all things AI, then I would recommend that you go and take a look at that on all your favorite streaming platforms. I would like to begin by just acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are all meeting at our various locations across the country and pay respects to elders past and present. I'm in Melbourne, so I'm on the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd also like to just take this opportunity to acknowledge that there is quite a lot of work going on in Australia, bringing an Indigenous perspective to the issue of responsible AI. We're very lucky in this country in that we have the oldest continuous living civilization in the world, 65,000 years of Indigenous peoples living on country. And I think it's important that when we are dealing with issues such as responsible AI, that we actually draw on Indigenous cultures and Indigenous values and try to integrate those and learn from those in how we define a responsible society going forward. And as part of that, I'd just like to call out a couple of pieces of work. Firstly, Kathy Robinson's work that's been doing a lot of work within CSIRO with Indigenous communities and AI in the Northern Territories. And also we've been having quite broad conversations with Angie Abdullah about how can we take Indigenous cultures and values and incorporate those into our thinking around responsible AI, and that's very much an ongoing conversation. So I'm here with three amazing guests today, and we're going to talk about all things responsible AI, what it is, and in particular, what actions can you take as a business to get the benefits of AI, but while minimizing the risks? And in fact, that's the working definition of responsible AI that we're going to be using in this webinar. Responsible AI is really at its heart just about trying to maximize the opportunities that we get from AI, but also minimizing any negative or harmful effects that might come with that. Just to give you a little bit of background about what's happening in the world of AI. I'm sure you have been seeing a lot of stuff in the media recently. I think it's fair to say that 2023 has fast become the year of AI, ever since ChatGPT was introduced towards the end of last year, and we've seen integration with Bing and Google Workspace and so forth. There's been a renewed surge of interest in all things AI, and lots of businesses now trying to define strategies about how they're going to introduce AI and get opportunities from that. But I think we're also in a time of somewhat quite polarized views when it comes to the future of AI. On the one hand, you've got people who are strong advocates and say that there's going to be massive productivity benefits from AI and it's going to really revolutionize Australia's productivity. And then at the other extreme, you've got people warning about even potential existential threats from AI. And I do think we need a more balanced view on these things. And of course, the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. There's lots of benefits, but we also need to guard against the risks as well. And I think that's the essence of what responsible AI really means. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So you can control the volume and also add closed captioning using the controls at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And there's also a chat function where you can connect with the many people joining us from all over Australia today. We did ask for people to contribute questions in advance of this webinar, and we've had a massive response to that with over 100 questions being submitted. So we're going to try and get to as many of those as we can today. We're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, but you can also add more questions as we go and we'll try and answer those as well. So just enter those into the Q&A section of the platform. And finally, we're going to have a quick poll to start the webinar. So that should pop up in the platform. And if you can answer that, and that will just help us understand where you are on your responsible AI journey, and we'll revisit that at the end of the webinar as well. So let's get straight into it. So we've got three fantastic panelists today. So we've got Judy Slatcher, who is currently lead of the cross-ecosystem responsible AI think tank at the National AI Centre, and is also an entrepreneur in residence at the CSIRO. So welcome, Judy. We've got Rita Arrigo, who's the strategic engagement manager at the National AI Centre. So welcome, Rita. And we've also got Liming Zhu, who is Research Director of Software and Computational Systems at CSIRO's Data 61. So welcome to Liming. And I think you'll agree that we've got, three of the top minds in the country when it comes to responsible AI. So I'd like to start just trying to make this discussion a bit more concrete, because it's easy to talk about responsible AI in broad terms, but I always find that giving concrete examples of where companies have implemented AI either responsibly or maybe not so responsibly is very instructive. And so I'd like to start just by asking each of the panelists in turn, do you have a good example that you always roll out where you think, that company's really implemented AI responsibly? What did they do and how did they do it? And we might start with you, Judy.
Thanks, John, and hi, everybody. The one that really impressed me actually was the world's largest global insurer, Allianz. They have been implementing AI now for quite some time, obviously in insurance, and have been securing significant benefits. And one of the benefits they've been getting is by a greater prediction of where risks might emerge, they can work with their clients to reduce those risks. So it's actually reducing the amount of money they get from insurance, but at the same time improving outcomes for their clients and their customers. And one example in particular is the driving records of young men who are particularly at risk of accidents, and intervening earlier to prevent those accidents and therefore prevent the insurance claim. It's really fascinating. And the reason it's so successful is when you hear the CEO talk, he's very clear on his expectations of the use of AI by his company. He says he focuses on two things: that whenever he talks to one of his managers, they can explain exactly how they are using AI, and they can explain how the machines are making the decisions that they're making, given that those decisions impact people's lives. And the second area as CEO and the board he focuses on is how to build his workforce for the future so that his workforce can transition just as the world transitions to an AI-enabled world. I think it's really terrific when you look at what they've done. They've embedded five principles that they really drive forward, and you can see the benefits in terms of actually reducing the risks people are facing. I see other examples, John, whether it's Schneider Electric, the world's largest energy manager, using AI to help with their circular economy and decarbonisation, whether it's the New York City, which I just read yesterday, committing to be transparent whenever they're using AI and automation in recruitment, or whether it's the editor of the Financial Times saying they'll be very transparent whenever they're using generative AI. So I think there are lots of good examples, and they do tend to be a bit clouded out by some of the doom and gloom.
Thanks a lot, Judy. And just to kind of call out some of the points that you've mentioned there, I think very important when we're considering responsible AI is that explainability. So an AI system that can actually explain why it's making certain decisions, the transparency and being transparent with your customers that you are using AI, and also the cultural aspects in terms of your workforce and so forth. Great, fantastic example. Rita, you talk to industry an awful lot in your role within the National AI Centre, so you must have come across lots of examples where AI is being used responsibly, maybe a few where it's not being used so responsibly as well. Do you have a favourite example for us? Oh, and you're on mute, I think.
Oh, here we go. We're on.
Yeah, we got
sorry
you.
About that, John. Look, I have, like you said, lots and lots of different examples, but I'm a big fan, a bit like what Judy was talking about, of some of the work that seeing AI machines is doing to dramatically improve reduce the number of accidents on the road, particularly for truck drivers and bus drivers. And I think that stuff is amazing when you're actually assisting drivers to have better information and to be able to use AI to their advantage. I also am a big fan of some of the work that's happening in the environment. You know, we need to protect the environment. There's so many things that can be done. And one of my personal favorites is the work at Kakadu, which used AI, drones, and Indigenous intelligence to actually dramatically improve the way we were able to bring back the magpie geese into the ecosystem at Kakadu. And the same thing's happening at the moment with the Great Barrier Reef, where we're using computer vision to better understand the Great Barrier Reef and then be able to better protect it as well. So they're my areas. And the last one that I think is a really important area is the area of accessibility. And some of the work that we're seeing in navigation for people who are low-sighted is pretty spectacular as well.
Right, and I think all of those examples illustrate another key principle that we need to take into account when we're implementing AI responsibly, which is to really co-design those solutions with your customers and your end users, whether that's Indigenous rangers in Kakadu, whether it's marine scientists on the Great Barrier Reef, whether it's people with disabilities and you're using AI to make things more inclusive. That seems to me to be a kind of key consideration. The mistake that people sometimes make is they just bring it to technology. They only think of it from their perspective, but they don't think of it from their customer perspective. And this is true of all technologies, but particularly true with AI. So yeah, great examples. And Li Ming, in your role within CSIRO, you spend a lot of time as well with industry, with CEOs, with boards, various senior directors within companies. So are there some good examples of AI being implemented responsibly that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. We have seen a lot, especially as a science agency. We often see things ahead of time, people experimenting with some of this responsible AI practice and technologies. So one of the favorite examples is one of the biggest financial services company in Australia building a chatbot. So this is similar like ChatGPT, but it's the chatbot when you log into a particular bank or somewhere you interact with asking questions, including when you log into your personal account, you can ask very specific questions. Imagine it's really ChatGPT being used in a very serious situation. The reason I like this particular example very well is they're really connecting very concrete practices of the machine learning engineers, the software developers, and the high-level oversight in board and executives very closely. So it's not one group of people doing work and not being aware by the other groups of people. So in this whole process, we have actually not only they have adopted some of the best practices, they also have created some of the new best practices for that particular use scenarios, like sector-specific, financial service sector-specific best practices for responsible AI, including how to make some of these very high-level principles testable in a particular piece of software, how to have an auditable trail that people, regulators, or others can have a look at what's happening for a particular intersection. So these kind of practices are also being shared back. By working with State Sichuan, obviously, we have generalized some of this practice to other scenarios, and that sharing back, incorporating some connected practices are some of the things that we value very much. And finally, I want to emphasize AI is always a system. It's the entire system. It's not the language model behind it. So this particular example also demonstrates a lot of model level best practices, connecting with system level best practices, and connecting with the organizational governance approaches.
Yeah, I think great points there, Li Ming. And just to call out the two things I took away from that, it's really about having that diverse team with different perspectives. It's not just about technology, it's about the governance, it's about the cultural aspects. And then related to that, taking a systems thinking approach to when you're implementing AI. Again, it's not just about taking our off-the-shelf AI technology and implementing that. There's a lot more to it than that when you're incorporating that into your organization. So great. So I think there's some evidence there that there are companies out there in Australia who are doing this well. There's probably a lot more companies, though, that are maybe not quite so far along that adoption curve. It's often said that in Australia, we're behind the rest of the world when it comes to AI adoption. But also, on the other hand, there's a very strong desire in this country to be leading the way when it comes to responsible AI adoption. So I'm wondering, Judy, if you could tell us maybe a little bit based on your experience about what are you seeing out there in the business more broadly? I mean, we've seen these good exemplars, but is everybody on board the train? Are people struggling? Are they hesitant about implementing AI? Do they know how to do it responsibly? What are you seeing?
Yeah, look, I think in first response to a couple of those last questions is for many companies, it's like, where do I start? I want to do the right thing. I want to make sure this is good. I understand that for my customers to trust what I do, or my clients or my stakeholders, I need to get it right, so to speak. But if we just take a step back for a second and just think about how AI is tracking in Australia. So increasingly, obviously, we're using it in our everyday. And in fact, pretty much in every meeting I was in last week, whether it was with my catch-up coffee with my real estate agent friend or a startup infrastructure provider, everybody's talking about how now that I talk to, obviously I'm in a bubble, talk to about how do we implement AI, and everybody personally is using it pretty much in their everyday lives. I see in our critical sectors like mining and agriculture and health that actually those organisations are quite often at the forefront in the use of AI because they're solving their real business challenges. So, you know, one of the world's largest project managers for the mining industry is using digital twins and a range of AI initiatives to minimise health and safety issues, to minimise environmental impact, to reduce the cost of remote maintenance and remote collection, etc. So I think in our front-leading sectors and industry sectors, there's huge expertise, even through to, you know, given fertilizer has such an impact on emissions, how do we reduce the use of fertilizer using AI and robots to make it very precise and very specific? I see great use across the not-for-profit sector. Rita mentioned a couple with the Great Barrier Reef. There's also work underway on disaster response or more rapid disaster response or bushfire management. So I see many of our leading businesses just doing it, just getting on with it. And in that context, because they are responsible, because they have taken a strong ESG lens to their business as a whole, they are implementing good guardrails and have principles for it. What I also see, though, and this is where I think we just all have a role to play, is that Australians don't trust the use of AI as a whole. So the majority of Australians say we're ambivalent about it or we don't trust it. And that was a recent survey by the University of Queensland and KPMG across 17 countries. And Australia was no different. And we all know that for business to be successful, it needs the trust of its stakeholders in no matter what it's doing. So I think that's a real wake-up call for us as a country. The second is that if you ask a CEO to say, how are you using AI? What is your AI footprint? There will only be a few who can really explain it in the way that I mentioned to the CEO of an insurance company. You know, this is how we're using it. These are our principles. These are the things I pay attention to as a CEO. So I do think we need to be lifting it to the level of each CEO taking accountability for the use of AI and with the board. And then when that starts to happen, it unleashes the environment in which great staff members, software engineers, and others can actually thrive and do their best work. Right. Similarly, though, when we look at the most recent survey on Responsible AI Maturity Index by Fifth Quadrant, only 3% of companies have achieved what we call maturity in responsible AI implementation. And that is actually down from 8% in the previous one because they recognise that it's hard and they do need the help and support of the sorts of tools and things that Limi mentioned and the work that the National AI Centre is doing. And then if I take even a step back, I think to myself, have we as Australia got our heads around what's our roadmap to be an AI-enabled society and economy. Do we have a roadmap? We have a government very focused on building something like that, which is great, but we don't have it yet. We aren't investing significantly or sufficiently to remain competitive in this space. And also, if we unfortunately look at the digital intelligence index, which was released recently, we're now 88th out of 90 countries. So there's some really good things happening, particularly in those critical industries where we are competitive, globally competitive, and we need to be driving forward and using AI to be successful. But we don't have the trust, we don't have the investment, and we're really not systematically, in the way that Li Ming mentioned, working through what does it take to embed AI responsibly. Yeah. On the other hand, there's thousands supposedly on this call, so there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy to get it right. And I know as a country we will.
Absolutely. And I might just pick up on that, Judy, and maybe throw to Li Ming or Rita, because I think you painted a very good picture of some of the challenges that Australia is facing in adopting AI more broadly. But when it comes to responsible AI in particular, you know, Minister Husic has said in public that he would like to see Australia leading the way when it comes to responsible AI. Australia was one of the first movers in this space. We had an AI ethics framework in place way back in 2019. It was 4 years, which is in an AI timeline is a very, very long time. We're one of the first countries to do that. So, I mean, maybe Li Ming first. I mean, where do you see Australia compared to the rest of the world in responsible AI in particular?
So I feel it's Australian have a lot of smart researchers in both the algorithm level and the system level, and a lot of willingness from the leaders to experiment. I think that ecosystem is really the strength. A lot of other countries are very much focusing on the algorithm level. Do we make the model, the algorithm itself, safe and responsible? And maybe there are a lot of high-level principles at the moment being operationalized. But Australian is quite unique in taking a system-level look, because what matters by the end of the day is really the system, the products, the chatbot product itself, for example, interacting with the society, and how do we manage that risk at that level, and inventing some of the best practices. So in the last 6 months, I feel I have seen a huge amount of experimentation in this space. Companies trying to not only leveraging the new generative AI technology, of course, they are the talk of the town right now, but also other type of AI, predictive AI, and how it's being integrated into systems, some of the interpretive AI. All this kind of experimentation is happening right now. For example, there is a very sizable engineering house in Australia. Basically, internally, the system development process is the concrete practice of building these AI systems. They have entirely reinvented their approach to leverage AI for more efficient delivery. But what I see the potential is some of these are still being applied at low-risk scenarios. Internal customer support, talking to your data is the top scenarios, for example, leveraging the large language models. But there is still some hesitance, or maybe not hesitant, it's the right thing to do, conservativeness in terms of rolling out this kind of very powerful AI like large language models integrated into their external facing products and services. But they are inventing the system level guardrails to help that happen, because, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, Australian is not the powerhouse of those large language models itself. We are not, you know, creating yet our own companies like OpenAI and others to build those kind of massive models. But that also gives us a lot of opportunities to really focus on how do we harness the power of these powerful language models? How do we lead in that system level best practice to best utilize the technology?
It may, however, Australia may, however, be a powerhouse when it comes to responsible AI. And you're being a little bit modest here, but I know that we've looked at some metrics of R&D capability in Australia when it comes to responsible AI, and at least according to some metrics, there are arguments to say that we're currently leading the world. So I think that's very, very good news. Rita, do you have anything to add to that conversation? You've obviously, you've taken a global perspective on the work in this and in other roles. Would you agree with what the two panelists are saying?
No, absolutely. But I do think that there's still a lot more work to do to help industry adopt AI responsibly and to take that to help them to innovate. So, at the moment, the people that are better customer experiences, they're innovating with their products, but that's still in a low percentage. So I think there's a lot more to do there. And to get people to use AI for that innovation and for their customer service and to improve productivity, trust is really important. And for us, responsible AI has been about really building that digital version of a fair go so that businesses want to take action and, that get guidance and that they can actually get support to be able to build their responsible AI platforms. So part of that has been this impetus to launch the Responsible AI Network. And it's actually a cross collaboration of a whole lot of different capabilities ranging from law, standards, which are very important in making trustworthy and responsible AI, leadership, technology and all the different technology capabilities we need to bring to bear, design, which you talked about a lot, around John, around the end-to-end design. How do you design that system so that you understand where your data is coming from, where it's being stored, how it's being looked after, and all that side of things, which I think as Australians we're very stressed out by things like surveillance and computer vision. So I think it's trying to provide the capability to make it easier to design these systems so that they see risks around that. Yeah. And I think the other one is around leadership as well. So being able to have CEOs that are interested in using AI and have faith that we can deliver this in a responsible way. So yes, there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of learning to be done in this new area of responsible AI.
Absolutely. So and let's we're going to go to the Q&A part soon, but I just want to see if we can provide some help to our audience. So at the beginning, we asked a poll. We said to our audience, how clear are you on the potential application or implementation of responsible AI in your business? And roughly 1/3 of our respondents said that they're pretty clear on doing this. But then we had 42% that they were unsure and 15% that they were unclear. So I read that as saying that there's a lot of people out there in our audience right now who want concrete help of what they can do now to implement responsible AI. You talked about the Responsible AI Network, Rita, but is there anything else that the National AI Centre is doing that we could point people to that they can get help now on how to do this well?
Well, there's two things I would recommend. Number one, if you're looking at using an AI solution that may be off the shelf or may be developed so that you can kind of implement that faster, we have an ecosystem directory that allows you to browse some of the Australian AI partners out there and some of the things they're doing. One of them that I think is amazing is a dentistry app called Eyes of AI, where they're actually scanning your mouth in 3D. So we go to the dentist and we get those 2D scans, but this is all in 3D. And then they're able to predict from the computer vision that they take around what challenges you may have with your mouth, etc. And this stuff is amazing. So there is a lot of that side of things where you can tap into an ecosystem of companies that are delivering AI solutions, but there's also tapping into the Responsible AI Network. So I know it feels like it's a very ethereal thing, but it's actually, there is some real hard best practice advice around how to use standards, how to look into what governance you need to use, or how to look at what technology you need to use. So we have a large language model coming up as well, so you can kind of tap into that. One company that I think is really amazing is Sapia.ai. So they're on a mission to make it easier for people to hire in a way that removes the discrimination and bias. And they're using a range of different psychology AI mashed together with hiring technology, and they're things in terms of really improving the hiring process and also dramatically improving some of the women that they can recruit as well. So that's an Australian company called Sapia.ai based here in St Kilda.
And same question to you, Li Ming. So, I mean, you've got a team of over 25 top researchers working on responsible AI. So what are they doing that could really help businesses out now?
Right. I think the business is often struggling to operationalize some of the responsible AI principles and high-level frameworks. There are international standards coming out. They are all very important. But when it comes to a organization business, what are the sort of questions the board and the executive needs to ask? What exactly a system engineer, software engineer needs to incorporate in practice responsible AI and test some of these very complex systems. So we are basically working hand in hand with industry leaders to develop these kind of new tools, guidelines, playbooks, methods. From a high level could be the question banks that different stakeholders can pick from the question bank and ask the right question and verify the answers. At the middle level, you could be talking about system engineers, software engineers, practicing responsible AI, but importantly, their outputs or the way they are practicing is also mapped back to the governance mechanism of the organization. So they are all linked together. And also even including a lot of the automated technology. For example, we have a dark pattern detector, which can identify questionable and manipulative AIs, like UI being the key elements we can try to understand and detect and mitigate some of the risks. So all these connected practices are helping different types of organizations to work with that. And the final thing is we're dealing with a lot of emerging technology. We're talking about it. The large language models in the last 6 months has really changed a lot of business. Many of them are experimenting, and that's the type of thing data strength usually can help a lot, because we have been working with large language models for half a decade at least. And this revolution or evolution is well anticipated. And how do we help Australian business to navigate this? It's something that we are eager to help.
Perfect. I might come back to you soon, Judy. I know you want to add in here, but I do want to get to the Q&A from our audience. But lots of great tips and resources there from Li Ming and Rita, and we'll hopefully post some links where people can go to get that. We do have a natural follow-on question from Don Young in our audience, and he says that he thinks there's a lot of people who want to be responsible with the AI but don't know much about what that means and how particularly to measure if your AI is responsible or not. And so the question is, how can we measure it? So it's fine to say, do all these things, use all these frameworks, be responsible, but at the end of the day, how can you measure it? How can you know if you're being responsible or not? And I might throw that one at Judy, because you're looking like you've got a good answer to that.
It is such a good question. Such a good question. And in fact, when you think of many of the other societal challenges that businesses work on, how you measure your impact is one of the cornerstones of actually them being able to act in it. So what we have already is lots of work on how to embed, as Li Ming was saying, the right processes, the right approaches, the right cross-sector thinking from governance through to frontline and back again. We've got lots of work on what needs to be in place for your AI to be responsible, including the RAI Maturity Index by Fifth Quadrant, which is really clear on the steps needed. In terms of impact, is it actually working? Is it not creating unintended consequences? I think this is where the brilliance of our people inside CSIRO and the RAI network really can help. It's about real-time measurement. It's about understanding what the system is doing at any particular time. It's about being very tapped into consumer feedback, to the masses of information that comes from the market about what your company is actually doing at any particular time, and being very attuned to understanding the impact it's having pretty much real time as much as possible, but at the same time using leading techniques and capabilities to measure that impact and understand it. In terms of specific measurement, I think the two things will be helpful. One is to having clarity and measuring. So for example, if we go back to Allianz, right? They have come up with the 5 principles that they think are most critical for them to deliver ethical or responsible AI. Those principles they then turn into we want to be transparent. They then have very clear measurements about how they are being transparent. They then have proper assurance and risk management around the transparency, and then they have a continuous feedback loop. So the 5 areas, I'm just trying to find the 5 areas they have.
Well, I might relieve that because I might throw to Li Ming, because I know, Li Ming, that your team is actually working on some of these risk assessment frameworks, and maybe if you could just briefly talk about the question bank work that you've been doing, which I think does give one way of actually concretely measuring how well companies are doing on responsible AI.
So the question bank work I briefly mentioned earlier is just a collection of questions we have extracted with all the various frameworks. Some are very concrete frameworks, some are international standards, some are principles coming out. The questions that the authors of those kind of frameworks, the organization are asking people needs to ask. And every one of those questions actually have a measurement or metrics embedded. Some are very explicit, whether you have certain mechanism available, yes or no. Some are not very explicit, and we're making them more explicit in terms of maybe this can turn into some test cases you can verify and validate. And also there's a lot of element of the quality and the integrity of performing some of these measurements, because it's one thing to say, yes, I have a mechanism, I have a process to deal with bias. Is another thing to actually look into the quality and integrity, performing them and constantly trying to self-improve. So coming from these different angles, we have already started to have patent catalog. When I use the word patent, I just mean reusable solutions, and it cuts across products. If the product you are building, the process you are building them, and also the overall governance. And importantly, that what Judy said is this measurement and metrics is not about the product itself. It's about the impact on the society. So you really have to have measures and metrics and think ahead what this product can have, the risks and opportunities for the wider community. And that needs to be done together with the community to evaluate.
Absolutely. So this question bank approach in particular, that gives you a way that you can self-assess how well you're doing, and then you can track that over time. But it actually relates to the next question that we've got from Matt Nitka, and I love this question, because I always say that, you can have all the frameworks in the world, you can have all the guidelines and all the tools and all the processes in the world to help with responsible AI, but ultimately it comes down to culture. Do you have a culture of people that think about responsibility first? And this is at the heart of Matt's question. He says that ethics is an applied field. It has to be learned for people to develop their responsibility muscles. And I love that phrase. If we can't get people to really make sense of these principles in practice, how can we get to move beyond platitudes and actually get to something that's really effective? Who wants to have a go at that question?
It's definitely one of those areas where you have to take your principles and turn them into practice. And I think we saw a lot of that happen in the web world, when people started to create websites and some of them weren't accessible and they had all these challenges. And end-to-end solution of what we're doing with our AI solutions. And it's basically interpreting those cultures into your solutions. So if you think it's wrong to, keep data about someone, then you actually interpret that into your design of your solution. And, if you want to tap into what other people are doing in this, learn. And that's something that the Responsible AI Network can do because of the webinars and the content that we make available around what people are doing to move principles into practice. So that is a really important concept.
Yeah, and I'll give one very concrete example of something that I saw working with a company a few years ago about how companies can flex their responsibility muscles, because changing the entire culture of your organization and getting everybody to think that way is a long-term thing. But one thing that this company did, they gave a role for somebody in the team that they called, well, I called it the critical friend role. And they were empowered to speak up. If they saw a design element or something going on in the organization that was not consistent with the company's values, and they backed that up with what they called open and honest calls, where every project would take time in the project to actually sit back, reflect, and have a conversation about the company's values, and were the AI systems that they were developing consistent with those values. So I think there's some very specific things that you can do that will help with that cultural transition, because as we know, cultural change more generally is quite a hard thing to do and takes time.
A lot of people are talking about this idea of having a responsible AI champion in your organization. And I think that's just it's very similar to the safety culture, and the RAID network can really help you to get some of that, data that can help you kind of become that responsible AI champion in your organization.
Yeah.
But I see that as a really important element.
Yeah. Let's get to another question. We've got a question from Gary Jolly Rogers. I'm not sure if that's his real name, but hello, Gary. So this one's about data. So he says data from some fields, including the one he works in, are poorly curated and sparse. That's particularly the case with biodiversity data. So what can we do when we're not in an environment where we have lots and lots of data that we can train a large language model on, but we're actually dealing with a situation where there's poor and sparse training data sets? You can
looking at synthetic data, or that's a really big area, particularly in Australia, where synthetic data being used to help route autonomous vehicles throughout our huge land space. So that's a very big area of being able to use simulated and synthetic data to help enable that AI process. But probably Liming can answer that one as well.
Yeah, along the similar lines, synthetic data, simulation, modeling, a lot of the digital twin of system, not only we are understanding the system we are modeling, but also creating additional data for AI to learn from. And a lot of data do exist, and because of existing laws and the risk of data sharing, and people are locking up certain data without being able to fully utilize its potential. So if we have the right responsible data governance to assist in there, many of the data can be unlocked and produce additional insights through machine learning and AI.
Cool. We've got a question specifically for you, Judy, if you're ready for one. This is from Beth Worrell, and it's about the not-for-profit sector, which you worked in a lot in your previous roles with Red Cross and the World Wildlife Foundation. So the question is, how are non-profits in particular able to benefit from AI? You would think they would have a particular care about doing this in a responsible way.
Yes, so let me use 3 examples because AI is what is going to help us actually solve some of the world's biggest challenges. And if you look at the work that CSIRO did on global challenges, I think it was called, AI needs to be, and we need AI to solve those. And obviously doing it in a very responsible way is a critical part of the not-for-profit sector, because a big philosophy in the not-for-profit sector is do no harm as a sort of cornerstone. I'm going to give you 3 examples. The Australian Red Cross introduced an initiative called Humanitech about 4 years ago. It was all about how do we ensure that into the future technology is designed for humanity, and particularly AI is designed for humanity. And that's been doing some seriously good work around disaster response. It's been working on the bushfire mitigation and risk mitigation. It's been working on some areas around human rights and assessing human rights in supply chains or modern slavery in supply chains. So it's really focusing on critical problem areas. Another is on provenance and transparency. So WWF has now for quite some years been at the leading edge of understanding where poaching is taking place, wildlife parts trafficking is taking place, illegal forestry, illegal fishing is taking place, and being able to track and understand that provenance and then eventually take action on it, or have the companies who are accidentally benefiting from that be aware of it. And then if you look at some of the things that Rita mentioned around the Great Barrier Reef, or just I was in Larapinta recently and there's buffel grass everywhere. It's now completely out of control. And the only way we will fix that is with AI to identify it and very specifically get rid of it. So the not-for-profits are really quite leading edge, I think, in many of the applications in the use of AI. And obviously, in doing that, their whole focus from the get-go is do no harm.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a great question here from Liam Murray, another question that I love. It's about AI washing and the fact that, lots of companies can claim that they're doing responsible AI, but how do we know that they really are if we don't have public measurements of that? And I might take this opportunity to throw to Li Ming here, because I know that you've been working with Alfinity Investments to put responsible AI metrics into ESG, and I think that's a real way forward here. I've been working in the space of responsible AI for over a decade, and when I started talking about it in the early days, I would always get this question at talks, which was, well, all this responsibility stuff's nice, but companies aren't going to care. They just care about the bottom line. And I never knew how to answer that question, but I think some of the work that your team has been doing on incorporating responsible AI into ESG metrics is finally an answer to that question. So what are you doing there?
Yes, thanks, John. Yes, that's a piece of work we are super excited for. So Affinity Investment Management is an Australian fund manager who has a portfolio of a lot of global companies as well, so both investing in Australia and globally. As we know, investors do care about certain things. For example, the ESG, the environment, social, and governance aspects of a company, they care a lot, and they are driving their investment decisions by looking at the ESG. And in the world of ESG, we have heard of greenwashing or ESG washing. So there is an element of there, how do we trust the data? So in this project, we are really looking at both. First, how do we look at AI, responsible AI, through the lens of ESG? Because ESG does have the environment, social, and governance angle covers pretty well with responsible AI areas of our interest. And I think Judy also mentioned the great work they're leading in the think tank, the AI think tank around footprint of AI. So, but how do we measure that exactly? And what's the investor's mindset and what they are looking for? So this project will produce a lot of concrete measures, indicators, so an investor can integrate that. But another important element of that, to answer that question, is how do we make sure the evidence a company shows everyone to say, yes, I have done great responsible AI through the ESG lens. How can we be sure that can be verified? There's a lot of technical approaches we can look into. I'm not going into the details, but rest assured, some of the techniques we're going to develop through this project includes that integrity of performing the best responsible AI practices.
And John, there's also standards that are coming. So there's new standards coming around AI management, like buckets of them, to start to really prove that you're using your AI in a way that's associated to a standard.
Yeah, fantastic. We got an interesting question from Kev Thornhill here. It was actually directed to Li Ming, but I think I'll direct it open to anyone. And this, I think, gets at the heart of, why are businesses not adopting AI more? And in particular, what are they scared of that's holding them back? Is it the law? Is it cultural aspects? Is it their brand reputation? Is it the uncertainty around what might happen, cost, skills, or is it something else? So maybe just quick fire around to each panelist. If you had to pick one of those barriers, which one do you think is holding back companies the most? Judy.
Great question. I think it is risk aversion combined with our economy is not that competitive. we have an economy that's on a fairly narrow base of mining, agriculture, etc., etc. I know that's a generalization. But if companies were first forced more to be more competitive and to be competitive globally, that would start to override the risk. And when you see companies in those sectors that I talked about, where they are competing on a global stage, they are embracing it and adopting it. So it's a mix of risk concern, how do we mitigate the risks? And in that context, how the hell do we do it? Where do we start? What's our first step in starting to adopt AI?
Liming, do you think there's one of those aspects, legal, cultural, brand, cost, skills, that is holding back more than the others, or do you think it's holistic?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from our interactions, we feel it's the understanding of the technology, because the AI technology is complex, and some people try to understand it at the model level, as in there's trillions of parameters in it, cannot understand it, and being overwhelmed by that complexity. But if they have the right practices, the right method at the system level, at the organization level, they can harness the power. Without, when we say the word understanding, you do not have to understand. We don't understand the universe today, all the physics laws. We still can harness amazing technologies to benefit humanity. So I think it's that what level understanding you need to stay at, and how do you have the best practices to perform that.
And Rita?
I think it's often because it's kind of stuck in one department, and I think it's of bringing out all that design across your organization that I think ends up it's these things that can make a real, where you get it from, and you look at the business challenges more closely versus the technology challenges. And I think for SMEs, there's also great ways that you can tap into existing AI solutions. So, you don't need to invent your own word processing system or your own email. You can actually tap into Australian companies that are doing amazing things with AI, like the Sapiers and like people who are doing, inspection in constructions like Vapor. So there's a lot of these opportunities, so you don't have to necessarily invent it. The ability to not engage a broader stakeholder and be stuck in that data science arena.
Okay. One thing we haven't mentioned at all yet, and there is a question related to this, is the role of regulation or legislation. Obviously, a lot going on in this space right now. There's a consultation out from the Australian government right now, so I would encourage everybody to go and have a look at that and enter your own thoughts. There's a lot going on in different countries as well. The EU AI Act is nearing completion, and then activities going on in the US and the UK and in other countries. So without getting into the specifics of what the Australian government should do here, because we don't want to preempt that consultation, do the panel have any thoughts on, what is the role of regulation, compared to other things like education or standards and so forth? Don't know who wants to take that one. The hot potato question.
Well, I know I've worked in regulated industries like finance before, and I think a lot of people want that regulation around, being able to say, I'm going to go see a body like APRA or ASIC, and they're going to make sure that what I'm doing is kosher. So I think people are really hungry for something like that in businesses to be able to ensure that what they're doing is aligned to that to their regulated industry.
Liming or Judy?
Yeah, I suppose whatever form of regulation of using existing regulation, people all come down to need to measure and having a way to measure the risk and understand the risk. And many regulation is talking about, is that high risk, low risk, middle risk? But the tricky question is, how do you know is a chatbot high risk or low risk? How do you understand that? I think that's the gist of many of the risk control aids. That's why we're working on the measurement and the metrics of these very complex systems.
That risk might change over time, I guess, as well, depending on how it's
in different contexts and everything. Yeah.
And we might move to, we've got one final question, which is it's actually a pre-submitted question. And I think it's actually a great question to wrap up this panel. So I'll ask each of you this in turn. And the question is, do you have a book or maybe some other resource that you can share that helps us imagine what the future with AI will look like, whether that's good or bad? And I might go to Li Ming here first, because I know that he's a very, very avid reader and probably has many, many books that he can share with us. But can you limit it to one for the purposes of today?
Well, the book I read over the weekend, which I posted on my LinkedIn, is The AI Revolution in Medicine, ChatGPT and Beyond, written by 3 very renowned scientists and journalists, which I enjoyed very much. You can check my reflection on that. It's really amazing how AI, and also including elements of how to manage the risk of using AI in medicine. So I enjoyed that very much. But I do want to say there's an upcoming book that we are writing on responsible AI best practice in that space coming up later this year. I look forward to share that book with you.
There you go. That was almost planned. Rita, what are you reading? What are you reading?
Well, you know, I am doing my 2nd year of judging the Women in AI Awards, and I've been reading about some of the amazing innovation that women are doing around the world in AI. So that's where I've been getting my AI education, and it's super exciting. So you'll probably see a lot of media about the kind of things that they're achieving and, you know, some of the areas that have previously been untapped.
Cool. Judy?
My favorite is Rethink X. It's a website, obviously, and it's just very good for helping push my thinking about what the potential could be in a low carbon AI enabled circular economy and how that looks and works. But Rethink X is great. Also, I thought your podcast was fantastic.
Well, I was going to say, I'll give you my own recommendation. Somebody tells me that there's this great podcast out called Everyday AI with this host called John Whittle, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everything. It's had 30,000 downloads so far. And really what we're trying to do with that podcast is cut through some of the hype, and it's full of really, really interesting concrete examples of where AI is being used very effectively, whether that's in healthcare and biodiversity, even in space, and also creativity. So do recommend that people check that out. Look, we are unfortunately at the end of our time today, so I want to thank everyone for being part of this conversation. Thank you for all your pre-submitted questions and lots of questions that came in during the webinar. Wanted to big shout out to my panelists here, Judy, Li Ming and Rita, for doing an awesome job. We'd also appreciate people's feedback on today's session so that we can improve future conversations, events. So we're putting the poll up again on the right-hand side of the chat screen. So please take a couple of seconds just to answer that question from the beginning of the session again, so we can see if we've helped you along your journey. If you're interested in finding out more information about either our responsible AI research in the CSIRO or responsible AI network, please visit the CSIRO website, where there's lots of examples of that happening. Just final words. Once again, great to have such a strong interest in this. I think there's a real opportunity for Australia to be really leading the world when it comes to how can we do AI responsibly. And I think we need, 1,000-strong audiences to do that, and to go away armed with extra tips and thinking and insights into how we can do this in practice, and go forth and prosper, everyone, and have a great Friday and great weekend for everyone. Thanks very much.